This and every episode of the Brewlosophy podcast is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, a member-driven organization that wants to help you save money on beer and brewing supplies. In addition to providing brewing resources and hosting one-of-a-kind events, the AHA offers money-saving discounts at nearly 2,000 beery destinations around the country through their Member Deals program. Join the AHA at homebrewersassociation.org and make your beer money go further. In the beginning, there was water. And over time, people learned that by tossing in a little grain, hops, and yeast, that water could be turned into something that both tastes and leaves one feeling pretty damn good. As our knowledge of the brewing process grew, so too did our understanding of the way certain aspects of water chemistry affect beer character. This is the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott. And on this episode, contributor Brian Hall is with me to chat about water chemistry in regards to New England IPA.
There's a lot of stuff going around about New England IPA, but the most important thing to me is balance and mouthfeel. And because we drink with our eyes first, many people have sought to have their New England IPA shine by increasing haze and turbidity without thinking about how it affects the harmony of the beer. So what we're going to do is talk about brewing this hop-forward style with a supporting malt bill, but really focusing on that mouthfeel and equilibrium. And one way to do that is to adjust your water.
Right.
Too many minerals and it's a chalk bomb, or if you're using the wrong ones, you kind of just end up with a mess.
Yeah, I've had so many, and I don't know if it's because of water chemistry necessarily, but that's always what I kind of chalk it up to. No pun intended. I've had so many New England IPAs that just leave kind of this gritty feel on my teeth. You know, your teeth kind of start to squeak a little bit. I've always kind of thought that maybe that could be yeast in suspension, which in my opinion is a poorly made New England IPA. Judge me if you want. The haze should not be coming from yeast in suspension as much as it is from other aspects of the brewing process. One of which could be the water chemistry component of it.
Yeah, you are not being judged at all. I completely agree. It should be a byproduct of the process, which, you know, the whole haze debate is a whole nother topic. But really, what we're going to talk about today is kind of working on that balance and that mouthfeel. Without thinking about injecting haze or other things into it, by starting with the building blocks of the beer, the water.
Right. Well, and you know, these minerals that we use for brewing are referred to often as flavor ions. So while it's going to have some sort of an impact, or it may have an impact on mouthfeel, it is also can have an impact on flavor and potentially even aroma. I know I'm not the only one who is led to believe that as long as your water tastes good, it's good for brewing, which kind of never made sense to me, seeing as I've tasted various, quote, good waters, you know, that all had different flavors. You can drink like an Evian and that tastes different than, say, an Aquafina. Those are not sponsors of the show, by the way. But once I started learning about the myriad styles of beer out there, I realized that some were developed based largely on the chemistry of the water that the brewers in those areas had available to them. The latest in that line of examples does seem to be New England IPA, at least based on my research. I think it's a good, interesting topic, one I am looking forward to getting into. But first, I want to thank everybody who's chosen to use our links to do their online shopping. It's so helpful and really does allow us to keep doing all of this stuff. If you want to support us in that way, head over to brewlosophy.com/support to find a list of links to bookmark and use whenever you do your shopping online. We would really appreciate it. We also have a way where people can be rewarded for their support. By pledging a monthly contribution of as little as $1 a month, you'll receive cool things like access to the Brew Crew private forum, secret contributor recipes, rad discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A with a very special guest. Our patrons have already had sessions with John Palmer, Michael Tonsmeyer, Gordon Strong, and Scott Janish. Coming up later in the year, we'll be asking questions of the folks from Imperial Yeast, Mecca Great Estate Malt, Dr. Charlie Bamforth, a.k.a. the Pope of Foam from the UC Davis Brewing Program, and Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, among many others. It's a pretty killer deal. People seem to be loving it. Learn more about this and all the other ways you can be rewarded for your support at patreon.com/brewlosophy. So just a couple more weeks, Brian, until a slew of thirsty homebrewers convene in Portland, Oregon for HomebrewCon 2018. We've got a ton going on and I want to remind any of you who will also be there about a few of these things. So we finally got our schedule set. So I'm just going to go over some of the stuff. You might have to stop and pause this and add things to your calendar if you want to do any of these things. First off, starting on Wednesday evening, we're going to be showing up Wednesday afternoon because we've got to set up our booth and whatnot. But that evening, that's June 27th, we're going to be hanging out at Imperial Bottle Shop with our friends from Imperial Yeast. They're throwing their Insane in the Yeast Strain event. It's free. All you have to do is pay for your beer, and we would love to see you there. They're going to be serving 8 beers made from the same wort. I believe it's by Everybody's Brewing. I think that's what they're called. And yeah, so they're going to 8 beers, same yeast or different yeast, same wort. It's going to be fun. Come on out. We'll be probably reviewing some beers and hanging out. Jersey and Tim are going to be there. Should be a good time. And then the next day, starting at 11 a.m. on June 28th, that's the first day of the conference, we're going to be collecting data right off the bat on some beers at our booth, which is located in the center of the expo floor. I don't think you'll be able to miss it. This is going to go until about 1 p.m. or whenever we run out of those beers. Right after that, at 1 o'clock p.m., we're going to start a series of live Q&A sessions, spending about an hour with each of our booth partners. So if you have any questions you want to ask the folks from Yakima Valley Hops, Mecca Great Estate Malt, or Imperial Yeast, swing by the booth between about 1 and 3 o'clock, 1 and 4 o'clock. Well, about an hour apiece. So it'd be 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. Yeah. So 1 to 4, stop by the booth, ask these dudes questions. They're really good people. Most of the Brewlosophy crew, including Jersey and Tim, all of us are going to be there doing this stuff. So come by and hang out. Later on that evening, starting at 9 p.m., is the annual Brewlosophy karaoke party at the Trio Club in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, man.
I know, dude. Are you prepping your pipes for this yet, Brian?
Oh, yeah. I've got a karaoke playlist on Spotify that I just, same songs just in case they come up, you know?
Oh, it's going to be a good time. I actually just had to take a few names off of the RSVP list, which is filling up quickly. But there are some open spots. So if anybody is interested in getting on that list early so they know they're not going to miss it, you can shoot me an email, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and I'll get you details on how you can make a donation to ensure your spot. This does start about an hour into the kickoff party, or what used to be called Pro Night. But you can show up to our party whenever you like. Pro Night's cool, but I kind of make my way around quickly. I think a lot of people do, and try all the beers I want to try. So we're going to bounce out about an hour into that to go do our karaoke party. So it's just something to keep in mind. We'll be letting anyone who wants to come in to the party just to fill any vacancies, but we only have room for about 105 people on the list, and we're already at like 76 with 2 weeks left to go. So keep that in mind. If you want to make it to the party, let me know now. All right, so the following morning at 11 a.m., that's Friday, Jersey and Tim are going to be reviewing beers live at our booth, and in order for them to do that, they need beer. If you're attending the conference and you want to have these goofballs give your beer the once-over, let me know, and we can get you on the list. We blocked out about 2 hours for this live review, though the length will ultimately be determined by how many beers they have to review. So we're going to figure it out. They're going to be reviewing beers. It should be a lot of fun. You can come and watch them like I do so often. At 2 p.m. on Friday, contributor Matt Del Fiacco and I will be joining our friend Chino Sachin in a talk called It's a Sprint that's focused primarily on methods to brew beer faster. It should be a good one. We've got a lot of experience doing these things. Our short and shoddy stuff's going to be coming up a lot, I'm sure. So come on over, listen to us talk. And then immediately following our talk, so at 3 o'clock p.m. at our booth, we're going to be hosting another data collection session with different beers and possibly, for a different project that we've got going on. I'm not going to reveal that right now. So if you like what we talk and write about, you'll love being a participant. It's a real blast. I think most of our participants kind of enjoy it, at least. So come by the booth between 3 and 5 o'clock on Friday to lend your palate to our brand of beer science. Our plan for Friday night basically just involves, hanging out in the corner during club night, drinking mostly water, handing out pamphlets warning people of the evils of alcohol. Right, Brian. We're going to be the
that's exactly what I think I remember from last year.
Yeah. So club night. It's okay. It's an okay night. So
it's all right.
Yeah.
I usually wake up feeling refreshed the next day, ready to hit those 9 a.m. seminars.
Yeah, it's all the electrolytes that I force into my body just to make up for the day. So anyways, the expo hall opens an hour early on Saturday. So starting at 10 a.m. instead of 11 a.m., we're going to be collecting even more data on some new experimental beers. Come by. you can, you can do all of the experiments we're doing. None of them are repeats. So again, we've got about 2 hours blocked out for that. And then after that is another round of beer reviews with Jersey and Tim, assuming there's any beer left over to review. And that'll be the last thing that Brewlosophy proper is doing at the booth. But we'll be hanging out until the expo closes on Saturday as well. So come by, you can pick up some merch. I know we've got a lot of stuff going on, but don't be shy. Come by, say hi, pick up some merch. We got some rad hats that we ordered. We're going to have t-shirts there, a bunch of free stickers from all of the partners that we've got at this booth that you can just come by and pick up. So should be a good time. All right, just a few months after HomebrewCon, Brian, you and I are going to be heading up to Yakima, Washington to hang out with the dudes from Yakima Valley Hops yet again, second year in a row, during which we're going to be attending, this is a first for us, the Fresh Hop Ale Festival. I've already heard from a few people who will also be attending, and I'm really stoked to meet them. If you're going to be around Yakima at the end of September, let us know. We'd love to meet up. Maybe go grab a beer at Varietal Beer Brewing Company, whatever.
Definitely. It's a very good time. And man, I'm really stoked that we chose the Fresh Hop Festival weekend, because look at the pictures from last year. It looks like a ton of fun. I
mean, dude, and is there any place you're going to get a beer with fresher hops than in Yakima, Washington during hop harvest?
No way. You step off the plane, the whole thing smells like dry hops. It's amazing.
People don't realize that, like in Yakima during hop harvest, it smells like your hop fridge. I mean, the entire city just kind of smells like your hop fridge.
It's awesome.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. Hey, listen, if you haven't already left a rating and a review for this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you take the 15 seconds to do so. It's not that tough, and it really does help us out. The feedback is great, and those ratings apparently help people who haven't heard of us to find the show. So I'll leave it alone. Please go leave a rating and a review. We'd really appreciate it. All right. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique and hard to find items for both the home and craft brewing markets, including high quality stainless fittings at competitive prices and very fast shipping. They're also excited to announce the release of the BCS 482 control system, which provides everything needed to fully automate your brewery. Learn more about this and the other great gear they offer at brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Okay, this week's feedback is from Ari. I believe he's from Lansing, Michigan, who left us the following message.
Morning, guys. Ari here from Lansing, Michigan. Always wondered about during the boil, make a lot of IPAs, and during the boil, that big ring of hop sludge that collects around the top of the boil kettle. I always have the inkling to shove it back down in, and don't know if that's the right thing to do, or what would happen if I missed that and didn't put it back in. Would it be completely different? All those different variables around that. Anyways, thanks for all you do, and love Jersey and Tim. Keep up the great work, guys. Bye.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. Brian, what do you think, man?
Couple quick thoughts. It sounds like, I'm guessing he's not using a hop bag or a hop spider or anything like that. The few times that I've had hop particulate on the side of the kettle is when I had like a vigorous sort of boil over, or that foam has gone up right before your break and then receded. So if I have that happen, I'll generally kind of give it a quick stir right before my boil is established. But more often than not, I'm using some sort of hop spider, or I've got a screen filter that I use. But if that happened to me, I'd probably just give it a light stir and then just let things go on. Usually when you've got a boil with a pretty good vigor, you don't really have, I don't get a lot of sludge building up as the boil progresses. Yeah. What happens with your system?
Well, I mean, I think I know exactly what he's talking about. It's the hop break, right? The protein mixed with the hops, everything that's in the kettle kind of gets stuck to the side of the kettle. It's always been, I've never really even considered the impact this might have until last week, doing research for last week's episode on astringency with Ray, rereading how to brew, the section in how to brew about you want to leave the Kreuzen ring in your fermenter behind, because that is there. Apparently there's a lot of tannins in there. So that can impart an astringent character to your beer. And I started thinking, well, I know that Kreuzen ring is different than the hop break ring in my kettle, but I always, my thinking has always been, hey, there's hops in there. I want those hops in my wort, so I scrape it back down. And so by the time I'm done boiling my wort, there's usually just a tiny little ring that kind of is crusted on from the heat, I think. But for the most part,
right.
I put it back in the beer. I don't know if it has an effect. That's kind of an interesting question. So, but Ari,
so using a hop spider, or a hop, whatever you want to call it, something that keeps the hops in a container, you do kind of get a little ring on the outside from the break material. And I want to make it clear that I don't scrape that back in. I only scrape in the green goodies if I see those.
Yeah. See, and I've been scraping in the break material, not even thinking about it, only because I don't use a hop spider or a hop bag very often. So, Ari, I'm not sure it has a huge impact either way, but it's something that I want to, maybe we could do an experiment on at some point. I don't know. Yeah, so good question. Well, if you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com, or like Ari, you can leave us a message by calling 951-444-0320. Again, that's 951-444-0320. All right, Brian. So tell me if you can relate with this. I think for most people who homebrew, there's this kind of, their friends, their family and everything kind of hold this expectation that, we as the craft beer nerds in their life kind of have this strong preference for beers that maybe are strongly flavored and high alcohol, really rich, very unique, hoity-toity, as one of my friends likes to call it. Is that something you've experienced before?
Oh, totally. You walk into a party, it's like, hey, I'm so sorry. All I have is Miller Lite or Coors Light, or all I have is Sierra Nevada. I know it's not super crafty, that sort of thing. And it's like, dude, I love beer. I love light beer, dark beer, everything but smoked beer. Just hook it up, man.
Well, and that's the thing. When I let people know that one of my favorite styles is just a well-made Pilsner, that that word is printed on a lot of big beer cans. You know what I'm saying? It kind of seems to throw them into a shock. Well, one of the beers that I've been getting into a lot lately, it's a relatively, I'm going to call it a new old beer, because Firestone Walker recently re-released their lager. So I served it to my buddies to see what they think.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
He's just going to feed us 20 Miller Lite Coors Lights for reviews, and then we're going to fail.
Very clear. No smell. Damn, I got some foam on my nose.
We should just do a whole review of your stuff with smell. Obviously.
It's another good beer.
No, it's not another good beer. It's another beer that's right in your wheelhouse.
It's
that doesn't
definitely
make it a good
wheelhouse.
beer. You don't represent.
Of course it does.
You don't represent the entire world of beer drinkers.
It's smooth. It's not like a just lingering taste on me, and it's a good beer. I could crush it. I like it.
By the way,
it might be a Miller Lite.
I like Miller Lite. I like Bud Light. Sometimes I also like Coors Light. Daggone.
It's a good beer in my opinion.
I don't know enough. It's a Miller Coors Bud Light. Miller Coors Bud. It's good. Yeah. Miller Coors Bud.
We could do this for another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It tasted the same as it did a minute ago. And I could go for another one if you had another one.
Hey, well, our wives will be happy. We're just in here drinking Miller Lite.
Is it any surprise that the guys liked this beer?
No surprise at all.
No surprise, right?
No surprise whatsoever.
I already knew they liked it. We'd been drinking it together for about 2 weeks before we did the review. But I think they kind of nailed it. I'm not sure. I don't think Firestone Walker designed lager to be a light lager, but it is a very, very simple beer. There's really not much else to say about it. It's delicious. It's simple. It's crushable. I'm going to probably have a few this afternoon. Brian, have you been able to try this one yet?
Yeah, I tried it once. It's probably my second favorite kind of, I guess you call it like a craft lager that's mass produced right now, only to Founder's Solid Gold, which is also super easy drinking. Those beers, those beer flavored beers, those are the next big thing. I'm telling you.
Beer flavored beer, man. Well, I'm glad the guys enjoyed it. Again, like I said, we're going to be drinking a few this afternoon. Well, if you have a beer or any other alcoholic beverage, whether you personally brewed it or not, that you want Jersey and Tim to review on the show, email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no work behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. I think it's safe to say that for the last, decade or so, at least up until recently, IPA has been known for being crisp, somewhat assertively bitter, and having a blend of piney dank and maybe a little bit of fruity hop character in there, all of which was coaxed out by relatively high levels of sulfate in the brewing water, particularly in comparison to chloride, another commonly discussed flavor ion. With the introduction of hazy, juicy New England IPA, things have sort of taken a bit of a turn.
Well, one of the last things I hear homebrewers do when they're working on their beers is to really think about water. I mean, it's definitely not as exciting as, hitting beers with huge amounts of hops or amazing grains. You just thought you open a bag of calcium chloride and go all Scarface on it and just, delicious.
You could,
you could, but it's probably not the same effect as doing it with a bag of Citra or something like that. So, people don't really think about it, but it's definitely something that is huge in the New England IPA world because it's almost, with the flavor ions we're going to discuss, it's almost the reverse of what's traditionally done.
Yeah, totally. And there's, I think when it comes to water chemistry, we have to think about, take a step back and kind of look at beer in general, and I think a lot of people know about the whole stout thing and at least the story that goes along with Guinness. I've heard some counter arguments against this, but that, they had hard water. And so that's kind of what ultimately motivated the production of this stout beer that has all of this roasted malt, which is highly acidic, to balance out the high bicarbonate, and bring that beer into its own. And, so water, basically what we've come to know is, or at least based on the beers that are out there and the styles that were developed in these certain areas around the world, that water chemistry played a role, at least in the types of beers that were brewed. And ultimately, I think, in my opinion, is somewhat responsible on some level, at the very least, for the various different styles of beers that we have available to us today.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's really kind of the local terroir, and people just brew styles that worked really well with those waters. And and it's awesome that we as homebrewers have the knowledge and the software and all that sort of stuff to help us to recreate, at least as close as we can, these similar water styles around the world. So It's something not as many people get into, but hopefully our talk here is gonna motivate those of you out there that haven't adjusted your water to really start thinking about it, because it's really dramatic, especially with this particular style of New England IPA. Because we're not going for that traditional Christmas in a New England IPA. There's a different goal, and that is a creamy, delicate, pillowy softness, which I mean, it's the hardest thing to do in the style.
I think so
anybody
too.
can throw hops at it, but
yeah. Well, yeah. So New England IPA is I think the only thing similar between New England IPA and what I'll call normal IPA, I guess, West Coast IPA or traditional
West Coast
IPA, is you know, it's not just the haze and the clarity. I mean, or you know, those are differences, but really the only big similarity is that they both are hoppy beers. I've had New England IPA that's in the pale ale, you know, ABV range. And there's all these differences between New England IPA and regular IPA. The one thing that holds them together is the fact that there's a ton of hops in both. But what we're going to focus, you know, like you said, New England IPA is pillowy, it's soft, it's known for having this creamy mouthfeel, all of this, and there's a bunch of different reasons or potential, you know, contributors to these characteristics, the use of, you know, adjunct and flaked oats and whatnot in the grist. But another thing that a lot of people talk about is the water chemistry, and in particular, the sort of opposite sulfate to chloride ratio as that I think a lot of people were using in traditional crisp clear IPA, where sulfate, I mean, I know people who were pushing their sulfate levels up to 350 ppm in these. Oh
yeah, people that are trying to emulate that Burton-on-Trent water that, you know, pushes up to 600 parts of sulfate. I mean, that's a lot. And, you know, you hear about, if you read about the history, you'll hear about, you know, that Burton snatch, which is kind of that light sulfury crispness that comes out of the style from that particular region, from the large amounts of gypsum that they have and all that loose rock over there.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I think a lot of people that were brewing, or at least people that brew West Coast IPAs, you know, they're looking for that hop accentuated, that bitterness, that crisp finish, you know, those sorts of things, which are a great thing to have in an IPA. And I'm not saying that New England IPA is better or worse in any capacity. It's just different.
Brian, stop hating on traditional IPA. Okay, you don't need. I mean, I feel like it's getting. Well, no, and that's the thing is sulfate is known for accentuating that bitterness, for really making that hop character pop, you know, for kind of, you could take a beer that has the same exact viscosity, as you know, two beers, same exact viscosity, add some sulfate to one of them, and all of a sudden it's like the perception of that viscosity, at least in my experience, it kind of goes away. It becomes thinner, it becomes crisper and more easy to drink. And I think that drove a lot of, you know, people's preference for IPAs, that it was this really hoppy, tasty, easy to drink beer.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. They, you know, just higher levels of sulfate kind of provide that dryness, that sharpness, that crispness, you know, hot summer day, something nice, hoppy and fresh tasting, and then balanced off with that crisp, nice finish. I mean, I'm literally like waving my hand around now because it's just such a great thing when it's done well. But you know, let's take a step back and just, you know, if we're gonna do this, let's talk about adjusting our water. And so the only thing that I will pitch out there that I try not to say let's do this, but the only thing I'm going to recommend you do is just know what your starting water profile is, because it's not something that we can taste and always pick up on all those little flavor ions that are in there. And so, but if you don't know where you're starting, it's really hard to figure out where you want to go.
Absolutely.
So that's the only thing I'm going to preach is just you know, take a look and find out where you're going from, and everything else I'm going to say, you know, take with a grain of salt. It's what's worked for me. But once you've established what your water profile is, it's pretty easy to find some software out there. Brew and Water is my personal favorite. It takes a little bit to get to know, but I believe there's an awesome primer on brewlosophy.com where Marshall goes through and teaches you how to use it. So once you have that software, you can plug in your initial water profile and go from there with whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different things that purportedly can change mouthfeel and the way that we interpret these hop flavors. There's things that can affect the haziness of the beer. It's, you know, fermentability, those sorts of things. But the thing that we're really going to focus on today is just talking about two flavor ions, chloride and sulfate, because those are the big ones that we're adjusting when we use a New England IPA. And actually, when I adjust my water, I'm pretty much, you know, I start from RO, and those are with a small acid addition to help lower my mash pH. Chloride and sulfate are pretty much the two that I look at when I adjust my water.
That's basically all I focus on. Some people might use some Epsom, which is just basically magnesium sulfate. So it's still mainly used for that to increase your sulfate levels. But when we say sulfate, we're the way we adjust that. I think most of us, we're using gypsum. It's super cheap,
Right.
And gypsum is calcium sulfate. So you're actually increasing your calcium levels as well, which is good for yeast health and fermentation and whatnot. And then calcium chloride is what we're using to adjust our chloride levels, which we haven't talked too much about. Chloride is typically reserved, and I think traditionally was discussed in terms of like malt forward beers. So I tend to think of like English style ales and stuff like that aren't super hoppy. They're not the Burton style, IPAs and whatnot. But these are those more rich malt forward, less hoppy. People will talk about like a softer mouthfeel or a more rounded bitterness that comes when you use increased levels of chloride.
Right. I mean, it's generally recommended that people are using, I think if you look up in some books, people recommend between 10 and 100 parts per million. But with New England IPA, we're pushing that up higher. We're really looking for that fullness and that sweetness a little bit. So we're pushing, I would say I generally tend to push up towards the 200 parts per million range. I don't generally go over 200. I think I went over 200 once, and I did kind of get some of that chalkiness that I pick up in other New England IPAs that I just cannot stand. So my personal recommendation is keeping it under 250 at an extreme maximum, but around 200 is where I max out at. And in a little bit here we'll talk about kind of our favorite ratios and that sort of thing. Yeah. But it's also important to kind of balance it out with some sulfate too. You can't leave out the sulfate, or else otherwise you're not going to have that balance. And it will provide it'll provide a little bit of that dryness, a little bit of that crisp finish, because we're not looking for a lingering, cloying sweetness or anything. Right.
Well, and these two flavor ions, these two salts, basically, when you're adding them to, I think most people are adding them to their brewing liquor before they mash in. So you're basically adjusting, and this is how I do it. You can do it however you want to. I collect my full volume of brewing liquor all at once, and then I adjust that. So if I'm brewing a 5-gallon batch, that might be 9.5 gallons of water, and I use Bruin water. And actually, the new BEERsmith 3 has a really nice water profile tab now that is super simple, really easy to use. Anybody can get a hang of it. So, but so what I'll do is I'll plug in. I know what my base water is. I know what the water is at my house for most of the year at least. Plug that in, pick my profile that I want to achieve it, and then you just press a button and it tells you what you need to add. I don't really pay much attention to sodium chloride or salt, table salt, or I also don't worry too much about magnesium levels. I use mainly gypsum and calcium chloride. You can buy a pound each, and you're going to be out like $5, and that'll last you years. So that's, and when I'm using something like, when I'm using gypsum, when I'm using chloride, I'll add that to my brewing liquor. I'll stir it all in, and then I just mash with that. And, you kind of notice, when you add either of those in different proportions, the water might look a little bit different, which leads me to think or always led me to believe that maybe it impacted appearance, as well as flavor.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I haven't done a test on it. I've read that chloride is supposedly improves stability and clarity. So the idea of adding more chloride into a beer that people are trying to get hazy seems kind of counterintuitive. But it's not anything that we've tested. I mean, there's a lot of things that say, it increases stability and decreases haze, and those are things that are often done to New England IPAs too. But they still come out quite opaque at times. So,
well, I'll admit, like one of my interests in kind of digging into the water chemistry side of things, particularly in New England IPA, was, to what extent does this difference in water chemistry, affect the haziness? Because, come on, New England IPA, if it's known for anything, it's known for being hazy. I mean, that's totally. It's juicy, whatever. But let's just be honest here. It's a hazy beer that is notably hazy. That's what it's known for. People are calling them hazy IPAs nowadays. And I just wonder to what extent maybe that higher chloride ratio as opposed to the sulfate contributed to that haziness. But that's basically the difference. You've got your crisp, clear, traditional West Coast IPAs, which might have a sulfate to chloride chloride ratio of, say, even 2 to 0.5 or 2 to 1. If you're going about 200 ppm of sulfate to 50 ppm or 100 ppm of chloride. And then if you just swap that seems to be what people are using for New England IPA. Brian, do you have any information on like who started doing this higher chloride IPA thing for New England IPA?
Boy, I don't. I mean, we've gone over the history of kind of New England IPA in general. I don't personally know who the first one to really start thinking about adjusting their water was, and if they did, whether they were vocal about it. I know people have tried to hunt down and figure out what's going on over at Hill Farmstead, and they're pretty hush about their water. Yeah. And a lot of their practices. I don't know whether the Alchemist was modifying their water. I've heard of current breweries doing it, but I personally don't know. I don't really know who started doing that back in the day.
Yeah, that was something I tried poking around and finding like some sort of like a tie-in to the earlier New England IPA. The Alchemist I think is what comes to mind first for me. And if water played a role in the development of that style or not, it seems to me like maybe that was just. It could have been just kind of this kind of happy accident. You know what I mean? Right. Trying to brew up a nice, hoppy beer, but the water was just higher in chloride than it was in sulfate. And there was, but perhaps, when I think about the development of new styles, if somebody was truly aiming to build this juicy, soft, kind of not malt forward necessarily, but certainly not harshly bitter and much more hop juicy flavor. I could see them thinking, well, let me experiment with higher chloride levels. When I'm brewing an ESB or when I'm brewing like an English bitter, my thought automatically goes to what can I do to accentuate that roundness, that warmth. I get kind of a warm kind of character when I use higher chloride levels, and that's not too dissimilar from what I perceive in well-made New England IPA.
Yeah, and this is a great lead-in because for people out there that have never adjusted their water, go out and buy some calcium chloride and some gypsum and dilute some of that into a very small amount of water and go ahead and start adding that into beers that you drink. Yeah. And it's very easy to see how those ions can totally change the way that you perceive a beer. And it's a really easy way to kind of start getting into this water chemistry and realizing, a very, very simple cause and effect.
Yeah. There are a few things I'm willing to say with such certainty, and I would not have said this 4 years ago. No joke. But water matters. The flavor of your water, which makes up what, like 98%, or not 98%. I think it's up 90 to 95% of every beer is essentially water. It's no wonder the characteristics of that water that you use to make the beer is going to have an impact on the ultimate character of the beer.
Yeah, and I think it really steps up your beer game too. I mean, and for those of you in competitions, I think it can push your beer to being a one step better. For those of you that are just trying to make the best beer possible, I mean, you will become obsessed with water and mouthfeel. That's the thing that has just been driving me insane lately. Is getting mouthfeel on my beer, and I personally think that a lot of that comes from water.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Well, and what's weird about mouthfeel is that, like I was saying, you could have these two beers that are like measurably the same viscosity. They've got the same finishing gravity. But you add a little bit of either sulfate or chloride, and all of a sudden your perception of that, and it's so weird. It's such a weird thing. Before we cut to break, I want to loop back around to something you touched on earlier, and that's the amount of either of these ions that should be present in the beer. Right. There are some risks, I think, that we run when overusing either of these. With sulfate, like you said, if you go too high on the sulfate, your beer might smell like a fart, first off. But secondly, in my experience, what I perceive when the sulfate's just way too high, we're talking like 500, 600 plus. And I've had this on beers that I've brewed personally using a Burton on Trent profile. I get kind of a mineral, almost metallic like character. And I know there are people out there who metallic is an off flavor for a lot of people, and they're wondering where that's coming from. Check your water. Your sulfate levels just might be off the chart. And that could be one contribution. At least that's something that I would look into. On the opposite end, way too much chloride in my experience. And I've done this couple of times now. To me, it does impart kind of that chalky. I know people will think calcium or bicarbonate, but with chloride, I get like this chalky, squeaky thing going on in my mouth. And it also, if you've ever tasted just a little tab of calcium chloride, it is like salt times 100.
I've never actually eaten calcium chloride, but that's good to know. I haven't done the Burton-on-Trent water profile. I was kind of one of those. I mean, I've always lived in locations where the water is delicious and good, for lack of a better term. And I kind of went with the idea that if you got good flavored water, you're going to end up with good flavored beer. So that's how I brewed most of my beers, including my IPAs. And it really was probably the second year living in Maine that I started to get a little bit into water. And then with the New England IPA surge going on there, I really got into it because I found that was kind of one of the big steps for making this style, was getting that water dialed in.
Yeah.
So, I don't think I've ever done a sulfate over 150. And that was only in conjunction with bumping up my chloride too, because I've played around with ratios of 1-to-1, 1-to-1.5, 1-to-2, with all of my New England IPAs. Only one time, like I mentioned earlier, only one time pushing above that 250 range. And I get that chalkiness. And, if you've got yeast in suspension too, you're really, and you see this in commercial examples or taste it, you get that chalkiness mixed in with a little bit of that yeast bite, grit, astringency, gunk muck.
So gross.
Or whatever you want to call it. And it's not good. And, we touched on this last time we talked about New England IPAs, of people kind of rushing into this process, and it was thought, and I thought this originally too, that it was a fairly simple style to make, but the more I pursue kind of that perfection of mouthfeel, if you will, the more difficult it actually is to get one that's just perfectly dialed in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think at the very least, what we can say is that New England IPA has kind of reinvigorated brewers' interests in water quality. And then, and particularly for this style, I think what we're looking for is, just to kind of sum everything up, higher chloride levels to produce a more rounded, softer, juicier overall character. It's gonna purportedly impact that mouthfeel, leave a pillowy mouthfeel, and all of that fun stuff. So
I would say the takeaway, at least from my personal experience, and I have brewed a bunch of these, I've tasted a bunch of these. That's my background. But if we're talking sulfate to chloride ratios, the ratio, I would say, is somewhere between 1-to-1 and 1-to-2. Some people go higher than that. My personal preference is around 1-to-1.5. To 1-to-2. I used to try and do some 1-to-1 stuff, but I found that just having a little more chloride, I just enjoy that a little bit more. So about 1.5 to 2, 1-to-1.5, 1-to-2 max chloride level, 200 parts per million, and you can do the math from there to figure out where you want your sulfate.
No, I think that's solid advice. And as much as I love talking about water, which really is an indication of how nerdy we are, I mean, I could probably go down this rabbit hole forever. We've got to get to a break, so stay with us. We'll be right back to talk about some experiments that we've performed on water chemistry. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to grainfather.com, that's grainfather.com, and get started today.
Founded in 1978 by brewing pioneer Charlie Papazian, the American Homebrewers Association is a division of the Brewers Association focused specifically on protecting and promoting the hobby of homebrewing. In addition to their work lobbying for the rights of homebrewers across the country, they're also the primary sponsor of Brewlosophy.com. By joining the AHA, not only are you supporting their cause, but you get a ton of benefits as well. Discounts at breweries across the U.S., early access to tickets for events like the Great American Beer Festival, and you get to attend HomebrewCon, the world's biggest gathering of homebrewers. Head over to brewlosophy.com/AHA now to sign up to become a member. There's a lot of talk about how the hazy and juicy characteristics of New England IPA, not to mention the soft mouthfeel and subtle muted bitterness, are at least in part a function of water chemistry, as we discussed earlier. We've performed some experiments that I think give us a pretty interesting perspective on these claims, though just a quick disclaimer, none of them have been specifically focused on New England IPA, but I still think that the results are pretty telling and can kind of give some insight as to what we should be doing when we're brewing any IPA.
Oh, totally. I mean, both of these talk about chloride and sulfate, and that's kind of the big thing in New England IPA we've been talking about. So the first one is one of my favorites because it is looking at that sulfate to chloride ratio, and this is one that Jake performed. And what he did is he brewed one of Ray's Mac IPA kits from Love to Brew, and he chose to have a sulfate to chloride ratio of 150 to 50. And then he chose to have one at 50 to 150.
Right. So he brewed two of these kits separately and then adjusted the brewing liquor for either one prior to mashing to 150 ppm sulfate to 50 ppm chloride. And then the other one was just switched. So what's that, a 3-to-1 ratio?
Yep. 3-to-1 and 1-to-3.
That's right.
So that's the upper end of what I just recommended and the highest I've gone. And I love this experiment because it really showcases that. So after he brewed, there was no impact on efficiency. Both were at 1065 original gravity, and then the high sulfate batch did finish 1 point lower than the chloride batch. It was 1.005 instead of 1.006.
Meh.
Yeah, whatever. But
I mean, if that's an effect of the variable, it's not a huge one.
No.
And perhaps it's slightly interesting, but I mean, one specific gravity point, we talk about this all the time. Probably not a big deal.
Yeah. No visible difference in appearance, which I thought was interesting because throughout this whole thing, I've wondered the same thing. Is it the high chloride levels that affects the haze? But both of these had the same appearance. Both were fine with gelatin.
Yeah, little disclaimer. So that might have dropped out any haziness that the higher chloride or higher sulfate maybe imparted. But ultimately, they looked the same after being fine with gelatin, which is common practice for IPA, I think. Maybe not New England IPA, but...
Yeah. This is where it is cool, I think. 22 people did the triangle test. It would have taken 12 to show significance, and 14 of them were able to tell the difference. And the funny thing is this preference was split.
I mean, that is, first off, the water chemistry experiments to this day are the ones where I'm just like, yes, we have consistently shown, and we're going to talk a lot about water chemistry in the future. We've got a ton of experiments on this. This one, we're specifically focusing on sulfate to chloride ratio and, mostly the impact that it can have on New England IPA. But you've got 14 out of 22 participants. I mean, that's quite a bit more than half, 3 more than half, just 22 people. And they were able to identify it. And then you got Jake, who said that he was easily able to tell these things apart. His experience, he said that the high sulfate beer had more assertive bitterness with hop character that popped, while and it tasted more dry. It had a more dry character to it, while the high chloride beer was smoother mouth coating and had somewhat muted hop character. I mean, if that doesn't just fit, right in line with what the expectations for higher chloride and higher sulfate are. And of course he was biased, but he talked to some people after they took the test, and they kind of had the same feedback. And I just think that's really interesting, particularly in regards to New England IPA. What is it we're looking for in New England IPA? Smoother, kind of slick, maybe softer, pillowy mouthfeel, muted hop character. So you're throwing in more late edition hops to bring that hop character up. I don't know. It seems like it makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, the muted hop character. Because the goal of New England IPA is to have as much hop flavor as possible. So,
but you look at the people who are brewing New England IPA, and they are tossing in inordinate amount of hops. Both, you've got late kettle addition to reduce the bitterness.
Oh, yeah.
You've got biotransformation additions. Then you've got keg hopping. I mean, it's almost like they're fighting to keep that hop character there. And I can't help but wonder to what extent that has to do with this higher chloride level.
I was just thinking that exact same thing. I never popped in my head like that, but I wonder how much that chloride is hurting the hop flavor, if at all. I mean,
and to what extent is it responsible for the kind of diminishing hop character that kind of, any IPA, drink it fresh, make it,
right,
and 5 days later it better be gone. Otherwise that hop character starts to diminish. And I know there are tricks that people are doing, such as keg hopping, to keep that hop character around a little bit longer. But it's an interesting result to me, even though this was done on a standard normal, Mac IPA. This seems to speak volumes, and I think it's kind of inspiring ideas for future experimentation when it comes to hop character and I guess shelf stability.
Right. And cool thing is Jake, as my voice cracks here. Cool thing is Jake sent this beer off to Ray, so we got another contributor that got to chime in, and Ray said he was very easy to identify the beers, and he described that chloride-rich beer as being very soft, warmer or flatter, and then agreed with Jake saying that the sulfate beer was being dry and crisp. No comment on muted hop character, but it's in both of these guys' responses, as well as personal experience, it seems pretty obvious that this chloride really does provide this this fullness, this sweetness, this warmth, this pillowy love that you look for in a New England IPA.
This perception of high chloride beers as having a warmer character, I have no reason why it would do that, but I just find it really interesting, because that's how I perceive all of my high chloride beers as well. There's like this kind of warmth that comes with it. Not alcohol warmth. It's not like a heating thing. It's not as crisp and light and as cold. I don't know how else to explain it, but
all this talk about New England IPA has got me thinking about juice in more ways than one. Before we get to the next experiment, I want to remind everyone about the awesomeness that is Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into every pitch-right pouch, over double what other labs provide, meaning fermentation kicks off fast and finishes quickly, leaving you with delicious beer that you plan to make. Imperial Yeast has strains for every style you can think of. They offer incredible customer service, and they care just as much about homebrewers as they do professionals. Check out everything they have to offer at imperialyeast.com.
All right. Well, so the next experiment that we did, we did this one well before Jake did his sulfate to chloride ratio experiment. This was done by Malcolm, I think back in early 2015, and it was sort of inspired by an experiment that we heard about from our friend John Palmer. This one is, if you're looking at the website, it's called Messing with Minerals. This was before we kind of settled on a more simple naming convention for our articles. But basically what he did was he brewed a couple of stouts, dry Irish stouts. I know those aren't New England IPA, but I think it'll make sense here in a minute. He brewed a couple of stouts, same exact recipe, except for one of them had a mineral profile that would be, more in line with a dark malty beer. If you go into Brewing Water, I think he just used the dark malty selection there. And then the other water chemistry was in line with pale hoppy. So I'm going to focus just on the sulfate and the chloride again. And I'll also share some bicarbonate levels here because those were quite a bit different. So for the dark malty water profile, the sulfate level was 55 ppm and the chloride level was 123. So not too far off from the first experiment that we discussed. The HCO3, the bicarbonate level, was at 86 ppm. Now, for the pale hoppy water profile beer, again, these were both dry stouts, same exact recipe, just different water profiles. The SO4, the sulfate level, was at 167, so that's 167 versus 55. And the chloride level was only 67 versus 123 in the dark malty one. So you see, this kind of is a little bit of this similar idea as that first go round, just a different style of beer. As far as the original gravities, the beers were treated exactly the same. The OG of the dark malty water beer was 1047. The pale hoppy water beer was at 1048. Probably not a big difference.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. Could have been like a process issue, whatever. There were no other differences noted. Both finished at the same exact 1010 FG, 1.010 FG. So then Malcolm was ready to collect data from participants. He served these to 29 people during a club meeting, and at 29 people, 14 would have to select the odd beer out in the triangle test in order for us to say that there was a meaningful difference, that we reached significance. And in the end, 4 more than we needed. So 18 people in total were able to identify the unique sample in the triangle test, which means that from a statistical perspective, this is a significant finding, which leads us to say that in this experiment, people could reliably distinguish a beer a dry stout at the very least that was brewed with a dark malty water profile from one that was brewed with a pale hoppy water profile. I don't know about you, but again, this seems to have some implications even for any IPA.
I think it has. On a personal level, I think it has implications for almost all beers.
Yeah, totally, man.
Yeah, it's really what I look at a lot of times when I'm making a beer is looking at that ratio, because I feel like of the things that we've tested and the things that I've tasted, it just has one of the most dramatic effects on how the beer, or at least how that mouthfeel comes across, and ultimately how that beer comes across to me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and just so we don't leave it out, Malcolm's impressions on this beer, he took 3 blind triangle tests that he had served to him by friends. And in fact, I think his buddies were kind of trying to put him up to it. Like, hey, listen, if you don't know which ones you're drinking, I bet you can't get it right. And he nailed it all 3 times. He described the beer made with a pale hoppy water profile as being, and I don't quite know what he means by this, soapy and harsh. It was unidimensional, mostly roast forward with, kind of like, I think he described it as having more of that kind of acidy coffee, burnt husk type of flavor, while the beer made with a dark malty water profile was more complex. It had layered flavors that were more porter-like. He picked up notes of chocolate, smooth roast, a low caramel flavor, and it just had a fuller body, fuller perception of body, at least in the end. So he said that while he preferred the dark malty water beer, when he was comparing them alone, his favorite was when he blended. God, what a nerd. When he blended the dark malty and the pale hoppy.
I do that too. I always blend in those triangle
So do I,
tests.
but
I swear, all your friends do come up to you after this and be like, well, let's see if you can tell the difference.
Oh,
and
every single one.
Yeah. It's super fun. But I mean, it's interesting. You look, he's got about a 1 to 2.5, 2.25 ratio on both of these. And so when he blends them together, it's a little over, it's about 1.25 to 1 being his ultimate favorite blend. So I mean, it kind of goes to show, it's like, if you haven't played with your water profile, play with it and do it post fermentation and just try it out, see what you think.
Totally. Well, and so in terms, let's think about these results. We got another significant result showing that at the very least, sulfate to chloride ratio seems to be making a difference. But in this one in particular, to New England IPA, I'm looking at how Malcolm perceived these beers, and you've got New England IPA, which we know has a very simple grist, right? I think for the most part, people are using maybe 15 to 30% flaked adjunct, whether that's oat or wheat or oats. And then on top of that, it's just a base malt, whether that's, Golden Promise or Maris Otter or Pale Turo or even Pilsner I've seen. So we're not, the dark malty, pale hoppy. I'm not saying either one of those would work better in New England IPA. I think what these results seem to show, though, is that given that ingredient list for New England IPA, that it could very well have the same impact that we were kind of picking up in that first experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with something so simple, I think that water isn't going to hide behind anything.
Yeah.
Even more so, not that it really hides in even something such as a dry stout, but
no.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I feel like these can lend themselves very easily to a New England IPA style beer. And actually, kind of it was very shortly before I joined Brewlosophy. Call it a coincidence or not, but I was starting to do a little bit of experimenting. And the second thing that I chose to do is I had a New England IPA beer that I had brewed, and I decided to serve it to my club. And this beer, it did not come out with that pillowy mouthfeel that I was looking for. I honestly don't remember whether I was playing around with something else or who knows, or it might have been a new system, because it was one of the earlier brews that I had done up here in Alaska, and after moving back. And so what I did is it wasn't exactly where I wanted it. So what I did is I just dosed the final keg with some calcium chloride in hopes to get some more of that kind of smoother, loving mouthfeel. Mm-hmm. And so what I did is I literally dosed it the morning of our club meeting. I dosed one keg with calcium chloride, and I just left the other one alone. And I took it to our meeting, and I did my own version of a triangle test. And I was back in the day, so I had like all white cups, and I'm like marking them red, green, and blue, and all this other stuff. And I served it to, I believe I served it to 27 people in the club, and it was pretty informal. I had everybody go through, taste, choose theirs, and then by a show of hands, so obviously it could have been people looking around as well, but by a show of hands, I had 22 people raise their hands and say that they were able to identify, or I mean, they took the test, and that 22 people raised their hand for the one that was different, which was very dramatic to me. And I asked for some feedback, and people were able to give me some feedback. So I don't think it was just a whole bunch of people following the crowd, although that is certainly a possibility when you have people taking tests in groups like that.
Well, 22 out of 27, you said. So that's, even if you account for the people who were, unintentionally raising their, biased and didn't want to look like the silly person.
Right.
Those are conformity studies, by the way, and they're pretty hilarious. Even when you account for that, it really does seem like, we've got these two experiments that we already discussed. You've got this kind of more informal experiment that you did that really does seem to support this idea that chloride and sulfate and the different ratios do matter. My question for you about that experiment that you did, Brian, did you notice, so you were able to tell them apart? Yeah.
I mean, I honestly can't tell you how many triangle tests I would have done at that time. I mean, that was a long time ago. And this ultimately didn't turn into a write-up because this other Brewlosophy website acquired me so quickly, so it never made it published. But we've talked about it, and it's still good information.
Totally. Well, no. So what did you perceive as being different in those beers?
I remember trying one of them. The one that was not dosed had a harsher. I don't want to call it harsh, but it had a kind of a crisper flavor, and the beer was a little bit harsher than I wanted it to be. Just a tad more, almost astringent, but not quite to that level.
So bitter,
it was a little bit bitter, but it just didn't have that smooth mouthfeel that I was going for.
Right.
And so I thought, let's try and see if we can bring it a little more to life, if you will, on the New England IPA side of things. So I dosed it with the calcium chloride. I think I put 6 grams into the 5-gallon keg that I had. And that boosted the levels close to the 225, 250 range, if I remember my math correctly.
Sure.
And, I wouldn't call it chalky. It wasn't the best mouthfeel I've had, but it made that beer come across as feeling smoother, and as Jake mentioned earlier, a little more mouth coating. It just kind of, it's almost like a Guinness character.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually coming to me. That's a great way to think about it. Is like, you think about the way that a Guinness tastes, and granted it's on nitro, But just that smooth creaminess, that's a lot of what we're looking for with a little bit of carbonation mixed in there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, we've done these experiments. Brian, you've done yours specifically on New England IPA. I think we've definitely got some exploration to do when it comes to New England IPA and water chemistry, specifically those two together. But as it is, based on what we have, the results of what we've already talked about, where are you at with New England IPA? I think we already all know, but what are you going to do when you're brewing your next New England IPA?
I just came off of a great one, and I'm just going to dial back into the exact same thing, about 200 parts chloride and about 110 parts sulfate.
Yep, that sounds about what I would do too. I don't brew too many New England IPA. There are certain characteristics about that style that I'm just not a humongous fan of. And that, no hate, dude. If you want to drink your milkshakes, that's all good with me. But my when I do brew them, usually it's going to be for an experiment, and in those scenarios, I'll be doing the same thing, probably 200, 250 parts per million chloride to, maybe 100, 110, 115 parts per million sulfate, whatever I can get to. At least closest with my starting water profile. And then besides that, I think sticking with those simple grists, because I think that's important in terms of the water profile. I think what we're trying to do with that simple malt bill is that higher chloride is going to pull some of that malt flavor out, which is going to help to balance that super strong hop juicy punch. And I just think for the style, at the very least, it works well. I'm definitely not going to leave yeast in suspension. That's my thing.
Definitely. No, make them glow. Don't make them dark.
Amen, man. Well, hey, is there anything else you have to say about New England IPA and water chemistry?
No, but I'm just super excited for HomebrewCon. That's all I can think about.
Well, if you're at HomebrewCon, make sure you stop by our booth. We are super excited to be there. And don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about the experiments discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.